What if you had everything, wealth, beauty, and royal blood, yet still felt like you had nothing? Leila Pahlavi, the youngest daughter of the last Shah of Iran, was born into a life of unimaginable luxury, growing up in palaces adorned with priceless art and surrounded by the finest privileges. But behind the golden facade, her life was marked by tragedy, exile, and a deep, lingering loneliness. From a beloved princess to a lost soul wandering between continents, Leila's story is one of heartbreak, shattered dreams, and a desperate search for belonging. How did the daughter of one of the world's most powerful rulers end up alone in a London hotel room, surrounded by empty pill bottles, at just 31 years old? Join us as we uncover the untold story of Leila Pahlavi, a life filled with privilege, but also pain, a story of exile, loss, and the heavy weight of a royal legacy that she could never escape. Childhood. Leila Pahlavi was born on March 27, 1970, in a military hospital in Tehran, Iran. Her birth was a moment of great joy for the royal family, and in her honor, the hospital was renamed. As the youngest child of Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi and Empress Farah Pahlavi, she was deeply cherished, especially since her father no longer had to worry about producing a male heir. Unlike her older siblings, who were born under the pressure of securing the royal lineage, Leila's arrival was purely a cause for celebration. Growing up in the opulent Niavaran Palace in northern Tehran, Leila lived a privileged life surrounded by luxury. The palace was a grand estate filled with magnificent Persian carpets, elaborate chandeliers, and beautifully landscaped gardens. She had her own private suite, a team of personal attendants, and the best education available. Despite the grandeur, Empress Farah was determined to give her children as normal an upbringing as possible. She wanted them to understand responsibility, discipline, and compassion, even within the constraints of royal life. From an early age, Leila displayed a spirited and adventurous personality. She was not a delicate princess who preferred quiet indoor activities. Instead, she was lively, active, and full of energy. She excelled in horseback riding, cycling, and swimming, often racing through the palace grounds on her bicycle or practicing jumps with her horse. Unlike her more reserved older siblings, she had a bold and fearless nature, which made her stand out in the family. Her father, Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, adored her and allowed her unrestricted access to his office. Even during official meetings with foreign dignitaries, Leila would barge in, climb onto his lap, and listen intently to the conversations. This deep bond with her father would later shape much of her emotional world. When it was time for Leila to begin her formal education, a special kindergarten class was arranged for her. Rather than attending a public or regular private school, she was educated alongside the children of Iranian aristocrats and the Shah's close associates. Many of these childhood classmates would remain her lifelong friends. Although she was raised as a princess, Leila was not arrogant or entitled. She was known for her kindness and warmth, often engaging with palace staff and showing genuine interest in their lives. Despite the efforts to maintain a sense of normalcy, the growing unrest in Iran inevitably affected Leila's childhood. By the mid-1970s, political and economic instability had intensified. Protests and strikes erupted across the country, and the once revered monarchy faced increasing opposition. Although Leila was too young to fully grasp the situation, she could sense the tension in the palace. The once joyous atmosphere was replaced by fear and uncertainty. By late 1978, the situation in Iran had spiraled out of control. Mass protests, violent demonstrations, and strikes had paralyzed the country. Leila and her siblings could hear the distant echoes of angry crowds chanting death to the Shah outside the palace walls. Even within the confines of Niavaran Palace, the tension was palpable. Then, on January 16, 1979, everything changed. With no other option, Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi and Empress Farah were forced to leave Iran. For security reasons, Leila was placed on a separate plane, accompanied by her grandmother, and flown to the United States. At just 8 years old, she was torn away from her home, her country, and the life she had always known. Family. As the youngest of 4 siblings, Leila had a unique place within the family. Her eldest brother, Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, had been groomed from birth to inherit the throne. Her sister, Princess Farinaz, was more reserved and academic, while her brother, Prince Ali Reza, was deeply sensitive and introspective. Among them, Leila was the most free-spirited and playful, but the exile forced her to mature far too quickly. After fleeing Iran, the Pahlavi family faced years of displacement. They first sought refuge in Egypt, where they were welcomed by President Anwar Sadat. However, their stay was temporary, and they were soon forced to move again. The family drifted from country to country, living in Morocco, the Bahamas, and Mexico, constantly searching for a permanent home. During this time, the Shah's health began to deteriorate rapidly. Diagnosed with lymphoma, he grew weaker with each passing day. Leila, still a child, was not fully aware of the severity of his illness, but she could sense that something was terribly wrong. In July 1980, when Leila was just 10 years old, her father passed away in Cairo. Due to security concerns, she was not allowed to be present in his final moments. This loss devastated her. For the rest of her life, she carried a deep sense of guilt for not being able to say goodbye. She later described the pain of her father's death as one of the most profound sorrows she had ever experienced. Following the Shah's passing, the Pahlavi family moved to the United States at the invitation of President Ronald Reagan. They initially settled in Williamstown, Massachusetts, where Crown Prince Reza was attending Williams College. Leila enrolled in Mount Greylock Regional School, a prestigious private institution. Although she adapted well to her new environment and was liked by her classmates, she never fully recovered from the trauma of losing her homeland and her father. As the family tried to rebuild their lives, they eventually moved to Greenwich, Connecticut, where Leila continued her education at the United Nations International School in New York. Later, she attended Brown University, where she studied literature and philosophy. However, reports suggest that she did not complete her degree due to health issues. Throughout her youth and adolescence, Leila struggled with the emotional weight of exile. She often spoke about her deep longing for Iran, reminiscing about family vacations to Kish Island and the rose gardens of Shiraz. Despite growing up in luxury, she never truly felt at home in the West. She was caught between 2 worlds, one that no longer existed and another where she never fully belonged. This sense of displacement and loss would follow her into adulthood, shaping the struggles she faced later in life. Career. Despite being a princess in exile, Leila Pahlavi never actively engaged in politics or sought a prominent public role. Unlike her brother, Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, who became the symbolic leader of the Iranian royalist movement, Leila largely stayed away from political discussions. Instead, she focused on her personal interests, education, and cultural endeavors. She pursued higher education at Brown University, where she studied literature and philosophy. However, there are conflicting reports about whether she completed her degree. Some sources suggest that she left the university before graduating due to health issues, particularly the early signs of chronic fatigue and eating disorders. Regardless of her formal academic achievements, she was known for her intelligence and curiosity. She was multilingual, fluent in English, French, and Persian, and had also studied Italian and Spanish, giving her the ability to navigate different cultural and social circles with ease. Leila was deeply interested in art, literature, and history, particularly those related to Iran. Even though she had lost her homeland, she remained passionate about Persian culture and its preservation. She often visited museums and art galleries, particularly in Paris, where she spent much of her time. She had a special connection to the Persian artifacts collection at the Louvre, frequently visiting to admire pieces from her country's rich heritage. Though she did not hold a formal job, Leila was involved in the Mehr Foundation, an organization dedicated to fostering cultural exchange between Iran and the West. She worked alongside her brother to promote Persian heritage and support initiatives aimed at preserving Iranian history, literature, and traditions. This work allowed her to stay connected to her roots, even as she lived far from Iran. However, her involvement was mostly behind the scenes, as she preferred to avoid public attention. For a brief period, Leila ventured into the world of fashion and modeling. She worked as a model for Valentino in Paris, posing for editorial shoots in luxury magazines. Given her royal background, striking beauty, and elegant demeanor, she was well suited for high fashion. However, her time in the industry was short-lived. While many admired her grace and style, Leila herself seemed uncomfortable with the superficial nature of the fashion world. She once remarked in an interview that she had mixed feelings about the industry, as it often focused too much on appearance rather than substance. Additionally, her struggles with anorexia and body image issues made it difficult for her to sustain a career in modeling. She frequently felt insecure about her weight, even when she appeared dangerously thin. Rather than pursuing a traditional career path, Leila chose to live a life centered around travel, cultural events, and philanthropy. She moved between the US, Europe, and Asia, attending high-profile social gatherings, charity events, and art exhibitions. Despite her wealth and royal lineage, she was known for her humble and introverted nature, preferring deep conversations over extravagant parties. She spent significant time in Paris, where she stayed with her mother, Empress Leila Pahlavi. The two shared a close bond, often attending cultural events together. Paris, with its rich artistic and intellectual scene, was a place where Leila felt most at ease. She was frequently seen at bookstores, art galleries, and museums, immersing herself in the world of literature and history. Leila also had a deep love for sports, particularly skiing. She often traveled to Switzerland for ski trips, finding solace in the mountains. In addition, she was a devoted football fan, enjoying matches and discussing the sport with friends. Her ability to connect with people from different backgrounds made her well-liked, even in elite social circles. Although Leila Pahlavi had the intelligence, education, and resources to carve out a successful career, she struggled to find a clear direction in life. Her status as an exiled princess meant that many traditional career paths were not accessible to her. At the same time, the psychological burdens of exile, her father's death, and her own health issues made it difficult for her to commit to a long-term profession. Instead, she lived a life of constant movement, staying in luxurious hotels and private residences across multiple continents. Friends described her as someone who was kind, sensitive, and deeply introspective, yet she also battled profound loneliness. She often spoke about feeling like a soul without a country, caught between two worlds, one that no longer existed and another where she never truly belonged. Though she never built a formal career, Leila Pahlavi remained a symbol of Persian heritage, resilience, and tragedy. Despite her efforts to engage in cultural preservation and philanthropy, she was ultimately unable to overcome the personal struggles that defined much of her adult life. Scandals. Although Leila Pahlavi was not involved in any major public scandals, her personal life was filled with challenges, emotional turmoil, and private struggles that occasionally surfaced in the media. As a princess in exile, she was expected to maintain a graceful and dignified image, but beneath the surface, she battled depression, eating disorders, and deep-seated insecurities that would ultimately lead to her tragic downfall. After leaving Brown University, Leila began exhibiting signs of anorexia nervosa and chronic depression. Friends and family noticed a dramatic change in her physical appearance. She became increasingly frail, often appearing visibly underweight. Though she was naturally slim, her obsession with weight and body image intensified over time. She frequently expressed dissatisfaction with her appearance, even when she was dangerously thin. Her struggles became more evident during public appearances. At times, she was seen looking exhausted and malnourished, sparking speculation in social circles and gossip columns. Some sources claimed that her eating disorder stemmed from the immense stress of exile, personal insecurities, and unresolved trauma from her father's death. Others believed that her brief involvement in the fashion industry as a model for Valentino may have contributed to her fixation on body image. As her condition worsened, Leila checked into the Priory, a renowned rehabilitation clinic in London, specializing in treating eating disorders, depression, and addiction. Despite receiving treatment, she struggled to make a full recovery. Her health continued to deteriorate, and she frequently experienced severe migraines, muscle pain, chronic fatigue, and digestive issues, all of which were likely exacerbated by her declining physical state. Leila was known to be reserved about her personal relationships, but rumors circulated that she had been involved in a serious romantic relationship that ended in heartbreak. Some sources suggested that she had fallen deeply in love, only to be betrayed or abandoned. This experience left her emotionally scarred, reinforcing her deep-seated trust issues and making her hesitant to open up to others. She reportedly confided in close friends that she struggled to establish genuine relationships, often questioning people's intentions. She feared that many approached her not because of who she was as a person, but because she was the daughter of the Shah of Iran. This suspicion and paranoia further isolated her from forming meaningful connections, leaving her feeling increasingly lonely. While the identity of the man involved in her rumored relationship remains unknown, it was said that the breakup devastated her, pushing her further into depression. Some reports suggested that after this heartbreak, she withdrew even more from social life, spending more time alone in her hotel rooms or traveling between cities without any real sense of purpose. Relationships. Leila Pahlavi never married, and much of her romantic life remained private. However, there were rumors that she had at least one serious relationship, which ultimately ended in heartbreak. Some sources suggest that the breakup left her deeply wounded, reinforcing her trust issues and sense of emotional detachment. Given her status as a princess in exile, Leila often felt that people approached her not because of who she was as a person, but because of her royal lineage. She once confided in friends that she struggled to form genuine connections and often questioned the intentions of those who entered her life. This skepticism, combined with the trauma of exile and her father's death, made it difficult for her to fully open her heart to anyone. In one rare interview, Leila described herself as a soul without a country, reflecting the deep loneliness she felt. She longed for love and stability but found it challenging to trust and rely on others. Some reports suggested that her fragile mental state and ongoing health issues also contributed to her difficulties in maintaining romantic relationships. She battled depression and an eating disorder, which likely made emotional intimacy even more challenging. While Leila never publicly confirmed any romantic partners, there was speculation that she once had a serious but ultimately doomed relationship. Some sources claim that the man she loved either betrayed her trust or failed to fully commit, leaving her even more emotionally isolated. After this experience, she became increasingly withdrawn, focusing instead on her family and personal struggles. One of the most significant relationships in Leila's life was her bond with her mother, Empress Leila Pahlavi. Despite living in exile, the two remained extremely close. Leila admired and adored her mother, often speaking about her wisdom, strength, and resilience. She saw Empress Farah as a pillar of support and sought comfort in her presence, particularly during difficult times. Leila spent a great deal of time in Paris, where her mother resided. The two frequently attended cultural events, art exhibitions, and charity functions together. Paris, with its rich artistic and historical heritage, was a place where Leila felt most at ease, and her mother's presence only made it feel more like home. Even though Farah was always there for her, Leila sometimes hid the full extent of her emotional pain from her mother. She did not want to burden her with worries, especially since Farah had already endured the trauma of losing both her husband and her country. Leila often put on a brave face around her mother, though those close to them knew that she was struggling internally. Leila also had a strong bond with her grandmother, Farida Diba, who played an essential role in her upbringing. Farida was a maternal figure of wisdom and stability, providing emotional comfort to Leila, especially during difficult times. When her grandmother passed away in 2000, Leila took the loss incredibly hard. Already battling depression and health issues, this event pushed her into an even deeper emotional crisis. Friends noted that after her grandmother's death, Leila seemed even more withdrawn and emotionally fragile. At the funeral in Paris, she appeared gaunt and frail, struggling to maintain composure. Farida had been one of the few people in Leila's life whom she felt truly understood her, and her passing amplified Leila's feelings of loneliness and isolation. Those close to her believed that this loss played a significant role in her downward spiral, leading to her tragic death the following year. Although Leila was warm, kind, and well-liked, she was also deeply introverted and maintained a small, close-knit group of friends. Most of her friendships dated back to her childhood in Iran, particularly from the private class arranged for her within the royal court. Some of these childhood friends remained in her life even after the family's exile. She was known to be a loyal and caring friend, but her ongoing trust issues and emotional struggles made it difficult for her to expand her social circle. Many of the friendships she formed were within elite and aristocratic circles, particularly among those who understood her background and the pressures of being an exiled royal. Leila had a particular fondness for artistic and intellectual discussions, often engaging with writers, historians, and artists. She preferred deep, meaningful conversations over superficial socializing. Despite attending elite gatherings, she was not the type to seek attention or enjoy extravagant parties. Instead, she gravitated toward intimate settings, where she could connect with people on a personal level. However, her increasing struggles with depression and eating disorders eventually caused her to distance herself from even her closest friends. In the final years of her life, she spent more time alone, traveling between different cities but never truly settling. Many of her friends grew concerned but felt helpless, as she often pushed people away whenever they tried to help. While Leila remained close to her immediate family, she was more distant from Iranian royalists and political exiles. Unlike her brother, Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, who was active in political efforts to restore the monarchy, Leila had no interest in politics. She did not engage with Iranian opposition groups and rarely participated in discussions about Iran's future. This detachment from Iranian political circles meant that she was somewhat isolated, even within the Iranian diaspora. While she still felt a deep love for her homeland, she avoided the political conflicts and divisions that defined the exile community. Her lack of strong political connections further contributed to her sense of being lost between two worlds. She was too royal to be an ordinary citizen, yet she had no real place within the exiled monarchy's political efforts. Despite being a princess, Leila Pahlavi lived a lonely and restless life. She longed for love, stability, and a sense of belonging, yet she struggled to find it. Her romantic relationships were brief and often ended in heartbreak, leaving her more distrustful of people's intentions. She had a deep love for her family, particularly her mother and grandmother, but even their presence could not fully heal the emotional wounds she carried. Her friendships were meaningful, but as her depression worsened, she withdrew from social life, spending more time traveling alone, living in hotels, and struggling with her mental health. She felt like an outsider in every place she lived, unable to fully integrate into Western society, yet unable to return to the Iran she once knew. Death on the morning of June 10, 2001, the staff at the Leonard Hotel in London made a heartbreaking discovery. Leila Pahlavi, the youngest daughter of Iran's last Shah, was found lifeless in her bed. She was only 31 years old. Her body, frail and emaciated from years of battling anorexia and chronic health issues, was surrounded by empty pill bottles, a silent testament to her long struggle with depression, loneliness, and physical pain. An autopsy report later confirmed that Leila had ingested more than 5 times the lethal dose of Seconal, a powerful barbiturate commonly used as a sleeping aid. Investigators also found a small amount of cocaine in her system, though it was not considered a direct cause of her death. There were no signs of forced entry or foul play, suggesting that Leila's death was either intentional or the result of an accidental overdose. Perhaps most hauntingly, she left behind no suicide note. The only clue to her final thoughts was a piece of paper with hastily written poetry, undated and ambiguous. Beside her, in the hotel drawer, lay a photograph of her family in the Tehran palace, a picture of her younger self sitting on her father's lap, a moment from a past life that she could never return to. Leila's health had been deteriorating for years, both physically and emotionally. She suffered from severe anorexia, which had left her dangerously underweight. Friends reported that she frequently complained about stomach pain, fatigue, and migraines, all of which were compounded by her dependence on medication. Despite multiple efforts to seek treatment, she seemed trapped in a downward spiral of depression and self-destruction. She had been addicted to sleeping pills and sedatives for years, using them to combat insomnia and chronic anxiety. Reports revealed that just 4 days before her death, Leila had visited her doctor in London and stolen Seconal pills from his desk. She was known to take far more than the recommended dose, consuming up to 40 pills at a time, a reckless and dangerous habit that had put her life at risk long before her final night. In the months leading up to her death, she had spoken to a few close friends about feeling lost and hopeless. She had also mentioned selling her apartment in New York and permanently settling in London, hoping for a fresh start. But despite these outward plans, her inner turmoil remained unresolved. Her mother, Empress Leila Pahlavi, later revealed that she had been worried about Leila for years. She had encouraged her daughter to seek medical help, but Leila often withdrew, refusing to share the full extent of her pain. In the final months, Farah had sensed something was deeply wrong, but she never imagined that her daughter's life would come to such a tragic end. On June 17, 2001, Leila Pahlavi was laid to rest in the Parsi cemetery in Paris, next to her beloved grandmother, Farida Diba, who had passed away just a year earlier. The funeral was a solemn and heartbreaking affair, attended by members of the Iranian royal family, aristocrats, and notable figures from European high society. Among those present was Frédéric Mitterrand, the nephew of former French President François Mitterrand. Mourners described the ceremony as deeply emotional, with many expressing grief not just for Leila, but for the entire fallen Pahlavi dynasty. She was seen by many as a symbol of lost royalty, a princess who had everything but found no happiness. Empress Farah, who had already endured the loss of her husband in her homeland, was now forced to bury her youngest daughter. The pain was unbearable. She later said in interviews that Leila had always been fragile, sensitive, and deeply affected by the tragedy of exile, but she had never expected to lose her so soon. Leila Pahlavi's death was a devastating end to a life filled with sorrow and unfulfilled longing. Though she was young, beautiful, wealthy, and well-educated, she never found true peace. Exile had stolen not just her home but also her sense of belonging, and the death of her father had left a wound that never healed. Her story became one of the great modern royal tragedies, a tale of a lost princess who had everything yet felt she had nothing. Those who knew her mourned the life she could have had circumstances been different. They wished that she had found the happiness she so desperately sought.